Welcome into the Husker247 Postgame Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christipherson, who is at Ross-Ade Stadium in West Lafayette, the scene of Nebraska's 28-10 win over Purdue. Also the scene of one of the ugliest first halves in, do we say Husker football history? I don't know. Brian, there's definitely been halves where Nebraska has just been destroyed, and the other team has gone up, big and things of that nature. This wasn't that kind of half. This was a car crash that you kept wanting to cover your eyes, but then also trying to look through one of your fingers to see if, maybe things got marginally better.
It definitely was that for the offense and special teams. I mean,
yeah. Defense was great.
Defense played really well for 4 quarters, but the offense, and the thing that made it frustrating was you saw they could move the ball. Like, it was not like there were 3 and outs or any of this stuff that was happening. It was Nebraska had a string there until the second half, where if you go back to the Illinois game, Schaefer, they had 8 straight possessions where they had been inside the opponent's 40-yard line and had no points, which is incredible. I mean, that number is. So that part was frustrating. 4 of those 8 drives feature missed field goals, block kicks, bad snaps, however you want to put it. One of those 8 features a terrible call by a ref. I just have to call it what it is, which I thought was really pivotal for a team trying to get over some mental hurdles, and you have that 4th and 4 called back. But yeah, it was rough. You kind of wanted to send the kids out of the room when Nebraska was going to line up for a kick in that first half. That's for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it also just, it's hard to talk about Nebraska football right now without zeroing in on how special teams affects everything else that you're doing. I mean, you can't really run your normal offense if there's no safety net of, okay, if you don't get the first down here, you can try to kick the field goal on 4th down. I mean, that's sort of what it felt like in that second quarter, where, Nebraska is punting from an opponent's 34-yard line or taking a 5-yard delay a game, right away because they can't kick a 50-yard field goal. And then, you wonder, should they have a different sequence of play calls to try to get a shorter down and distance on 3rd down and things of that nature. So it's just the special teams disaster is looming over the season in a way that I really can't remember any other time. I mean, they've been bad on special teams before, but this just feels entirely different. And I'm curious, what did you make of Matt Rhule's comments? I know you posted them on the message board. He addressed, some of the kicking issues. He called one of them just a straight miss and said the other 2 had to do with snaps. How do you feel like he handled and addressed sort of where things are with special teams?
I mean, I thought he handled it just like a coach has to. You can't just throw everybody under the bus. You got to, show your belief in them and, challenge them. It's got to be better. Like you've got to count at this level of football to get quality snaps back to the holder, where the kicker at least has a shot. And John Hull actually didn't have a shot on the last 2. There was just no chance for him. And so you feel a little bit bad for him because he misses that first one, which it seemed like a fine snap and everything. That was on him, but you get a chance for redemption. And then, no, you don't actually, because, there was no chance of it. It wasn't like it was bad, protection or anything like that necessarily about why either of those were blocked. It was just a snap. They were ground balls basically. And so, yeah, it's just stuff you don't expect to see at this level. It's probably in guys' head a little bit. I'm sure those guys have done it, 100,000 times in their life and done it right. And it's right now a deal where you've got to find guys who can function in that moment when it counts. And until they do, yes, it is going to be a big worry, and it does affect everything you do on offense. And it probably honestly does trickle down to why some of those drives stall out, because it has to be in your head a little bit that you don't have this security net of 3 points behind you. You feel like you've got to get in the end zone maybe. And so that it is a dangerous spot to be in. Rhule was proud of how his team overcame it and overcame the flags. He had a few comments about the officiating in there too. So All that's on our site, but I give the defense credit because I thought they kept Nebraska's head above water while everybody else was figuring it out.
Yeah, Nebraska's defense, until that final drive for Purdue, had only allowed 102 yards passing. Had Purdue's rushing game, under 60 yards, I think at that point, or under 70 yards certainly, and just continued to play really well. Throughout the first half and early in the second half, without much in the way of help from either special teams or from offense. So when you look at what Nebraska did defensively, and I get, so much of this year has been you have to talk about Nebraska and you can't give them that much credit because you have to say, well, it's UTEP, or Colorado's defense is bad, or Colorado's offensive line was bad, or it was Northern Iowa, or whatever. I don't really care that it was Purdue. The fact that they came back and they largely shut down Devin Mockabee and Reggie Love III, I thought that was impressive. I thought it was an impressive performance from the run defense. I thought we saw the tackling and the sort of things that you want to see from Nebraska's defense throughout the game today. There was a couple busts here and there, but for the most part, a really strong performance and a good bounce back effort from a unit that needed it.
Yeah, and if there's a real encouraging spot, it's that after last week, I think people were kind of questioning, like, wait, we talked all offseason about this defense, which is supposed to be top 10 and all this, and maybe that's not there. Maybe they're not even close to that. And again, the competition is what it is, but that's like the Husker defense, like people expected going into this season, the type of unit that even when the other side of the ball is struggling, they carry the weight until they figure it out. And honestly, Schaefer, I thought the play of the game was Bullock's stick on that third down, 8-minute drive. Purdue,
I'm glad you said that. That.
Well, I mean, Purdue, I didn't feel like they were owning the line of scrimmage or anything on that drive. It was just like they were getting some off-script plays where they were finding a way to move the chains. And so it was a frustrating drive, and it felt like if Purdue took this thing for 10 or 11 minutes and got it in the end zone, that could be a really tough thing to overcome the way the game had gone. And so when Bullock stopped it in its place with that, it was just a great tackle. They forced the field goal. Even though Purdue got 3, I feel like that had to give a jolt to Nebraska. Like, all right, that wasn't that big a deal. Let's go get something now. And then the other big penalty the big play was the taunting penalty on the ensuing possession on Purdue. It would have been a 3rd and 4. I'm not saying Nebraska wouldn't have picked it up, but that puts you suddenly on their side of the field. So it was like this sequence of 3 or 4 plays where it kind of turned, and then Nebraska was playing downhill a little bit. And Emmett Johnson was in the game too, and I thought that was a big difference.
Yeah, the reason I'm glad that you mentioned that is that earlier in that drive, they had an opportunity to kind of get off the field on a 3rd and short, and they just didn't really give themselves a great chance on the play. I mean, there's a couple of them. There was one where Nebraska was kind of lined up and spread out, and Purdue just powered it right up the middle. There was one where it looked like Nash Hutmaker got a hand on I believe Mockabee, and just he shook him pretty easily and was able to get the 4 yards. There was a couple times early in that second half drive where Nebraska was just right there to make the play and didn't. So for Bullock to be able to wrestle him to the ground in that situation, force a field goal, it did feel like a pretty nice victory for Nebraska, and it kind of got things going, I think, for the rest of the second half. You mentioned the taunting penalty, sustaining that drive. Nebraska goes down and scores. I also just felt like one of the sort of hidden stories in this game is Nebraska took advantage of a Purdue defense that was going to force the officiating to call some penalties, and they didn't call everything, but they got a lot of it. And I thought that was good for Nebraska to acknowledge, like, okay, we're getting these one-on-one shots down the field. We're going to throw it. Worst thing that's going to happen right now is that it's an incompletion. Otherwise, we might get the catch. We might get a penalty. And I felt like they kept going back to some of those plays early, using Purdue's aggression against them.
Purdue had 13 penalties for 165. Nebraska 11 for 94.
Yeah,
there was some calls we know, the one on Fedoni that took back the touchdown. I just thought was a terrible call, but Purdue got their money's worth on those PIs usually. And so Nebraska had 18 yards of offense, and then, throw on top of that all the flags. I mean, it wasn't as though Nebraska wasn't chewing up real estate all game long. They were. And those pass interferences were because I don't think they could cover Nair and Banks in some of those situations. So, yeah, Nebraska finally took advantage of it. And then, they had to get the lid off the jar, though. It felt like if they couldn't crack that how long was it going to go before they could get through the force field? And finally, that 3rd and goal to Banks, that was their first 3rd down conversion all game. And so you just felt like a weight was kind of lifted and like the better team should take care of it from there. And they did.
Yeah, there was a nice play design, too, to create the opening in the middle for Rhule to drop that in there. I want to throw some individual players at you and just kind of get your thoughts on their performance. We'll start with Zaire Wright, who stepped in today for Tommy Hill.
I really like how he's playing. He dealt
Do you like his dance moves after the pass breakups? How do you feel about those?
They're fine. Yeah, I don't mind a little of that. Surprised he didn't get flagged too for that. I'm surprised Ja'Cory will get to him, I'm sure, but he could have got flagged maybe the way.
Yeah, he could have.
But yeah, Sierra, he's just been really tight in his coverage, and he should have honestly, I bet he would say should have had a pick on the one. He had it read the whole way, and Nebraska lost another tug of war there in the 3rd quarter, I think it was. But he's been really good, and Tommy Hill was out there in uniform, but he didn't really do stuff in the team warm-ups beforehand, and you kind of felt like they didn't want to use him unless they absolutely had to. So it was Sierra and Jeremiah Charles show, and I thought for the most part those guys did pretty well.
Yeah. I want to ask you about Dylan Raiola, first road game, what you saw from him throughout this contest.
I thought he was pretty good. There was a couple throws in the first half where, like the one he missed just before halftime to Ramir, where he kind of floated it and sailed it on him. I thought there was a couple where he has that arm where he could just put it on the guy. And it maybe on a couple instances like that, they're going to look back and think that they should have had something there. But in the second half, he got really comfortable. He was seeing the soft spots in Purdue's defense really well. And I do really respect his just touch and ability to kind of these passes that in the past would get picked off by a linebacker. He just floats them above their head, and it's like a 25-yard gain, just like that. And I don't take that for granted after what we watched in recent years. And I also don't take for granted that he really hasn't, and he has the 2 interceptions this season that were 50-50 balls, no turnovers today. And if you said going in, he wasn't going to turn it over against this Purdue defense, which still doesn't have a takeaway on the year, I would say Nebraska's going to win. And so he did his part there in ball security. He continues to do well with that.
Yeah, it felt like at times, and this was a discussion on the message board today at Husker247, but it felt like at times he was trying to be a little bit too precise or a little too fine on some of those passes, and he just wasn't, he was trying to place it instead of just letting himself throw and do what came natural. And it does feel like in the second half we saw a little bit more of not necessarily letting it rip because he has so much touch on some of those, but it almost looked a little more comfortable in some ways. So I agree with you on that as well. Let's kind of keep jumping around here to different players. We got to see Javen Wright for the first time this year. What did we hear from the coaches or from Javen after the game? And what does it mean to just get a guy like that back on the field? I know he didn't play a ton, but you're hoping to kind of increase his usage sort of as you get into the meat and potatoes of the Big Ten schedule.
Yeah, I think Javen came out and talked with Brunt, so I bet he'll have a story on that. So I don't know exactly what he said, but I think it's awesome for him to see him and walk out as a team captain after all he's been through. And I know it means a lot to his team. He's had a ton of injuries throughout his career that have really kind of always kind of interfered right when it felt like he had momentum sort of at his side. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, he can get going where he builds up snaps and you see him play more and do what he can for this defense. Cause I do think he's a playmaker when healthy, but just to see him in uniform, that was a big deal, I think.
Not who. I've got a few more players for you. I know one of them you thought in particular, you've already said his name earlier in this podcast, played well. Tell me your thoughts on, Emmett Johnson and what kind of lift he gave Nebraska's running game, specifically in the third, fourth quarter there.
Yeah, I'm looking at his numbers right now. He had 8 carries for 50 yards and 3 receptions for 48. So 98 yards on 11 touches. And I just felt like in the first half, some of it was blocking, but I also thought Nebraska didn't get the most out of a few runs too, honestly. Like I felt like they were getting 1 or 2 when they could have been 4
Missed
or 5.
some holes.
Yeah,
Definitely missed some holes.
Yeah. And Emmett's got good vision. I mean, he just shows it every time he gets the ball, and he's got that wiggle, and it just seemed like his type of game where he could impact it. You saw him; he had 1 or 2 really extraordinary runs, especially the one on the drive where they scored for the first time, where he got it down to I think about the 10-yard line. That was just a great effort, and him making a guy miss. So he was really impressive. He even had one of those catches taken away on a screen pass when there was the flag, and then Rhule got flagged and all that. And he came back on the 2nd and 28 and picked it up again. And he's just kind of a plucky guy like that. Like his opportunity hasn't always been there, but he waits for it. And when he gets the ball, he seems to do a lot with it. And I think that's going to be hard to resist going to him going forward. At least that's how it seems to me when I watch him.
Yeah, I think it was one of his early runs. It was just it was an inside zone towards the middle of the field, and Purdue had collapsed it, and you just saw him make that adjustment in real time to just step outside, breaks a tackle, then picks up 11 yards on the run, and it was just something we hadn't really seen from Dowdell or Nebraska's running game, and it's just he just seems, Severe said this on the Sunday side session last week. Sometimes you need the running backs that can kind of get small to make them a little bit less of a target and make it harder on a defense. He seems to be good at that, at getting into those creases and getting through the hole, maximizing some of it. I was certainly impressed by Emmett Johnson today. I want to finish up with 2 guys. They're brothers. They both played well today. One of them had statistical contributions. The other one really kind of helped seal the edge and had phenomenal block on the Ja'Cory Barney touchdown. Tell me your thoughts on the Bullock brothers today and what we saw from John and Alex.
Yeah, John has just had a really good season.
Kind of a storybook season in a way.
Yeah, I'd say a great season, 5 games in. I mean, he's just always getting his hands on the football, and it was awesome to see him get that pick 6 because he does a lot of dirty work stuff, and then you can kind of get that moment that clinches the deal. I've already said I thought the 3rd down stop was maybe the play of the game. I just have to think a lot of guys are feeding off of him, and it has to help a young player like Vincent Schaefer, who got a lot of snaps, when you're next to somebody like that who just knows what they're doing sort of inside and out. And the same can be said for Alex. I mean, that's why he played like the 4th most snaps on this team a year ago, is because he knows the offense. He does a lot of dirty work. And, as they go through Big Ten play, maybe Alex isn't the flashiest receiver they have, but I think he's going to be very valuable in the stuff you're talking about, blocking on the edge and getting Nebraska to hopefully unleash some more explosive run plays, which started to come a little bit near the end. I just loved how they were getting Ja'Cory on the edge early, and then you had that play where Alex sealed it with the block for Ja'Cory to take it down the sideline and end it. Barney continues to be a great story too, just for a freshman. How he was like Schaefer at halftime, they came out, it was 0-0, and Husker fans are feeling kind of glum. And Ja'Cory Barney's just like dancing around in the end zone and stuff. He's just got that personality. And I think it's useful to have guys like that when you're kind of in a slugfest of a game that maybe you didn't want to be in.
I get the sense that Ja'Cory Barney, the moment isn't really going to be too big for him because he doesn't allow it to get too big for him in his head. Which is, how a guy like that just goes out and continues to make play after play after play. He's been huge for this Nebraska football team. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least get one final thought from you as this thing heads into Rutgers, the last game Nebraska plays before, I think, a much-needed bye to kind of try to get a little bit healthier, assess where they are. You get a Rutgers team that'll be coming to town undefeated. You got a Nebraska team coming off of a win against Purdue. Their 1 loss on the year against an Illinois squad that I think pretty similar to what they're going to see out of Rutgers on Saturday. What are your initial thoughts as you look ahead to this game?
My initial thoughts is first off, this was a big one to get out of the way. When I was driving over with Brunts to the stadium, we were kind of talking about, like, I didn't think like style points mattered today. I did wonder if it was going to be hard for them still to get over what happened last week. I thought that was a really demoralizing loss for this team, and it felt it like that around their camp all week long. And so I was really curious how they were going to respond. And you saw it was kind of difficult for some sides for half the game. So the fact that they're able to just get through this and win by 18 points on the road, I think they're going to feel kind of a sense of relief about that. And I hope play more loose next week against a Rutgers team that is just solid, and they can beat you on this little stuff that Nebraska sometimes lets teams beat them on. If you watch Rutgers last night against Washington, you saw that they're the type of team where you could out-yard them 2-1 and still find yourself going down to the last 2 minutes. I mean, Washington had like 520 yards and Rutgers had 299 or something like that, and Rutgers won the game. So Nebraska's really got to take care of the details, but it is tricky when you don't know if you can kick a 38-yarder or how that's going to go. So you kind of have to work around that a little bit. So, but I think Nebraska is going to be excited that they get an undefeated team in their building with a chance to get to 5-1 at the bye. And I know people are wishing they're undefeated right now, but if they're 5-1 at the bye, people will be feeling pretty good during that week off if they can get there.
They're exactly where I thought they would be through 5 games, which is 4-1. It's not exactly the order in which I would have picked it, or the win-loss of which I would have picked it, but they are here at 4-1. BC is there in West Lafayette, finishing things up. Husker 24/7, plenty of coverage on the website right now. Brian, appreciate you jumping on. I know that you're busy with Brunts, and you guys got a long drive ahead of you here today and tomorrow. Appreciate your time, and we will talk to you later.